Hello, everybody, and welcome to Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. My name is Prashant Mughlapati, and I'm a volunteer on the working committee that puts together Litquake each year. This is our 21st festival, and we are super excited to be streaming live from the Bay Area. And during Litquake, we will be streaming from around the world. Our final day of the festival is tomorrow. We've been running since the 8th of October, and we invite you to join us for tomorrow's 12-hour virtual lit crawl, live streamed from 7 cities around the world and countries such as England and France and everybody's favorite small island nation, New Zealand. We're super excited. For all of you who've been planning to move to New Zealand, tomorrow is your chance to hear from some of those amazing authors there, just in case the election doesn't go our way. Tonight, we're honored to be able to present the brand new book, Funeral Diva by Pamela Sneed, which has been released by City Lights Books and Booksellers. She will be in conversation with poet, podcaster, and screenwriter Tommy Pico. Some quick orders of business before we get started. I want to mention that you are welcome to ask Pamela and Tommy a question using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to your questions in the second half of tonight's event. Afterwards, you'll be able to fill out a short survey. Please take a few minutes to reply if you can. Those surveys are super important to keep funding for Litquake and making the festival accessible to all. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for our latest updates. You can support Pamela and Tommy tonight by buying their books directly from City Lights. We've put the information in the chat. Just click to buy using the links shared in the Q&A area at the bottom. We also ask your support for Litquake as an organization to allow us to bring you these events largely for free. If you believe in keeping literature a key component of San Francisco's cultural landscape, please consider dropping us a few dollars. Every little bit helps. As you can imagine, during COVID, community arts organizations like ours, find it hard to keep the money going, and we want to make sure that the festival continues for many years to come. Every little bit helps. We accept donations on Venmo, at Litquake, on PayPal, at info@Litquake, or directly on our website at litquake.org. So let's get on with the show. First off, our profound thanks to our long-term partner, City Lights, for co-presenting this event. And here is Elaine Katzenberger, the publisher and executive director of City Lights, to say a few words. Elaine.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Prasant. It's a pleasure to be here. We always partner with Litquake each year in a couple of events, and it's really a special time of year when Litquake happens. I am totally looking forward to seeing what that means to have a Lit Crawl online. The Lit Crawl event is really pretty spectacular every year. Pamela Sneed's book, Funeral Diva, is one of the new releases from City Lights Books. And, it's always a really special event when we launch one of our books at the bookstore. Pamela's been doing so many events already, but for me, this is the most important one because this is the one where she really becomes part of our family. This is when she gets welcomed in, with true ownership of standing among this lineage that I believe is an illustrious one and an important one. And the fact that Pamela has joined City Lights in this way, I feel very proud and honored that that's what's happened now and that we're able to do that. And I want to thank Amy Shoulder, who is a former editor at City Lights and now kind of an editor at large. Actually, she is an editor at large at City Lights. She is someone who worked at City Lights long ago during my formative years there. And when Amy brought Pamela's manuscript to me and said, I think we should publish this at City Lights, I didn't even have to look at it to know that it would be right because Amy knows what City Lights has done, what it should do, what it can do. And that's exactly what Pamela's book is. And I just, every poetry book that is published in book form is something that then becomes a very intimate little vessel. It's like the experience always is available to have that intimacy with an author when it's a book. You're just a reader and the author. But there are also books and poets that play this other role, and this role is endemic to the City Lights mission, this notion of poetry being part of a polis, and that the experience of poetry is communal. And when you hear, you are moved, and you are moved as a group to understand something about your place among the rest of humanity, not just your own place, and you're resonating with a poet, but it's you're resonating with other people with what this poet is revealing to you about yourself and the rest. And that is something that I feel is incredibly powerful and political. And it, you know, for City Lights, that lineage is Lawrence Ferlinghetti himself, the founder, and obviously Allen Ginsberg, and, you know, Diane DePrima, and Pedro Pietri, and Bob Kaufman, and Karen Finley, and Guillermo Gomez Peña, and Juan Felipe Herrera, and Tonga Weiss and Martin, and now Pamela Sneed. And I just feel like that's just a handful, but that's this beautiful through line of the power of what poetry can do. And so I feel really honored and proud to have been able to have a part in bringing this work out and getting to know Pamela and working with her directly a bit, and really looking forward to this conversation tonight. So thank you everybody who's here with us. And thank you Prasant and Litquake.
Thank you, Elaine. Just a few more pieces by way of introduction of our two amazing authors tonight. I want to first introduce Pamela Sneed, and I'll be introducing Tommy as well. Pamela is a poet, professor, and performer, and has been a visiting critic at Yale, a visiting professor at Columbia University School of the Arts, and is currently online faculty at Chicago School of the Art Institute. Her work is widely anthologized, and she has performed at the Whitney Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Poetry Project, NYU, and Pratt University's Smack Mellon Gallery, the High Line, and Joe's Pub, among many other venues. In addition to Funeral Diva, Pamela Sneed is an author of the books Sweet Dreams, Kong, and Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Tommy Pico is a poet, a podcaster, and writer for television. He's the author of the books IRL, Nature Poem, Junk, and his latest Feed. Originally from the Viejas Indian Reservation of the Kumeyaay Nation, he now splits his time between Los Angeles and Brooklyn. He curates the reading series Poets with Attitude, co-hosts the podcast Food for Thought, and Scream Queen, is poetry editor at Catapult Magazine, writes on the FX show Reservation Dogs, and is a contributing editor at Literary Hub. Please welcome Pamela and Tommy.
Sneed!
Yo, what's up? Oh my God. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Elaine for that wonderful introduction, and Fazan, thank you. Yeah, it's good. Anytime somebody says I'm home, I love that, you know, because I've been a wandering soul. So it's good to have a publisher that I can call home, and that has brought this work into the world. And so I'm honored and thrilled by that lineage. Yeah, and want to do my part. And then I'm like really thrilled to be here with Tommy, who I have mentored. We've talked about a million times. So now, so I don't know, it's really an honor. So like,
well, and especially because so much of this book is about home, you know, for you to find and to be in living in one, it seems like profound, especially for this work. So the way it's going to work this evening, y'all, as they said before, if you have a question for either Pamela or I, but mostly for Pamela, put it in the Q&A and we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm going to read a little short essay, and then Pam's going to read for longer than me because it is the launch after all.
Okay.
And then I'm going to launch into some questions.
Oh you're all grown up.
I know. So I'm going to read this essay. So I have an essay in the new issue of The Believer. It's called It's Working Out. And it's a very early pandemic essay. So like I'm having weird nostalgia for that time when it was just a pandemic, you know? So it's working out. I started a new project, I tell Max over house party, and bring a humongous jar of protein powder into the frame. Someone somewhere says we're gonna have a meat shortage or something. Sometimes on YouTube, I do the Tracy Andersons. Sometimes the Body Fit by Amy. Sometimes the Has Fit or the Mad Fit or the one with the lady in the 2-pound weights for 4 minutes that spaghettis my arms every time. In Zoom therapy, I asked Dr. John why the panic hits hardest when I'm still, when I'm in bed, when I try to read, when I'm sitting down for dinner. Dinner is anytime because time is LOL, but time was LOL before this. Dr. John says, it's a pandemic. He says we're endangered and the lizard brain wants to run, but right now the higher brain knows there's nowhere to go. On FaceTime, Jenny says she's been using Pedialyte bottles as weights. In my house party dolls house party group, Tasba said she's been using an app called Workout for Women. She likes it because it's not a real person telling her what to do. Marcos says he should get in on that. He says his double chin is getting a double chin. Marcos does not have a double chin. The label on the protein powder says to mix a scoop of it with my favorite drink, but I don't think they mean black cherry White Claws. Dr. John says my two brains aren't galloping together, that they're out of step. Today I tried the Bowflex 6-minute standing ab workout. I don't think it's working out my abs, but it's good cardio, I tell Nikki and Kat on our FaceTime art accountability call. None of us are making art right now. I asked my Food for Thought group chat if the girls are mixing protein powder with Diet Coke. I tell Dr. John I haven't kept a workout routine like this since I was 15. He asked what happened when I was 15. I was a gay res kid in a racist, homophobic high school 40 miles from home. Every school day brought new horrors, new ways people said they were gonna hurt me, and then did. In 6 months, I went from 230 pounds to 140. I'm 6'2". Kat says she's doing CrossFit through Plush Fitness. I feel the ache in my shoulder and I panic, like I'm legit convinced I have the virus, and it doesn't once cross my mind that I'm sore from working out. I use the CBD muscle rub I got from Morgan for your sex injuries, she told me. Because last year, every time I had sex, something bad would happen to my body. Laceration, a broken toe. Maybe quarantine is for the best, she texts. Survive, vital, vivid. Chantal has been doing strength training too. She says cardio is, she breaks up for a second, a lie. No matter how hard I stir, I can't get the protein powder to dissolve smoothly into the water. Globs of it stick to the glass and my teeth. Joe has a special word for going on a run. He calls it a run nut. Everyone thinks it's funny except Fran. Fran texts, I'm finally getting a butt. Working out is like a video game, except the video game is my body. Heather Robinson is my new queen, Sarah texts. Max says he's been running in the middle of the street because there are no cars. I made a standing desk with books and board games and shelves from Bed Bath & Beyond. Dr. John posits that in the absence of control, I'm exerting control over the one thing I do have control over. It takes me 3 listens of Control by Janet Jackson to walk to Morgan's house. I'm sitting with Fati and Essay and Morgan in Morgan's yard. This is our pod. It's different now from high school. I've learned to nourish my body instead of deprive it. I no longer want to disappear. It's a hot day, but we're in the shade. There's a breeze. The dog is asleep. I close my eyes and I'm right here. Thank you.
I love that. You know, we should also talk about, you know, pop culture and humor, you know, satire, because both of those things are coming up. I usually lead into these things, but since you brought up the pandemic, I'm gonna go right there. And so basically, you know, today, you know, there's a headline that they say something about that America is about to face the worst of this pandemic. And I'm just furious, you know, that if this had been handled correctly, you know, by the government, that basically it would have never gone this far, you know. And so I'm just so angry. And I hope when this man is voted out, that he will be arrested, you know, for war crimes, crimes against humanity, for this mismanagement of the COVID crisis, and basically and responsible for the deaths of so many unnecessarily. That's my speech, A Tale of Two Pandemics. The headline in yesterday's news blared a tale of two pandemics, shocking inequities in the healthcare system. What got me knew about the existence of two New Yorks, two 20, 30, 40, 50 Americas, maybe more, depending on age, race, class, citizenship status. Entirely different systems for those who aren't white, straight, middle class. Those of us who saw our brothers, friends, sisters die at the hands of a system that shunned, refused to treat, threw away the unwanted. Still can't forget a gay friend waiting for Medicaid to treat HIV. He got sicker and sicker. I asked why Medicaid took so long. He said they're waiting to see if I'll die first. That wasn't the America I learned about in elementary school. I was instructed to put my hand over my heart and salute. This wasn't the free America we sang of. People who are LGBTQIA already know that there are two Americas. A doctor who kept forcing me to take a pregnancy test, even after I insisted at the time I only have sex with women. I saw his scorn, still a test he made me pay for. And then those women who were forcibly sterilized, had wounders who never even stopped to explain, felt entitled to take scar women's bodies, breasts cut off, no options or consolation given. Women who aren't rich and white already know invisible lines you can't cross, with no insurance or Medicaid, forced into black markets for drugs, a land of botched care, botched procedures. Black people already know separate doors, separate entrances, treatments, options existing long after Jim Crow. And I have kept waiting for this moment, this time of a medical Me Too, when those who suffered from botched procedures and the indignities step out from the shadows, speak, and name the atrocities committed, medical malpractice. I won't blame all doctors, some are good, just middlemen like so many in a broken system doing what they can. And I'm grateful for the good ones in this pandemic, risking their own lives. But the image of medical researchers that we see in movies and on television who understand a complex problem, pour through medical books and science journals, stay up all night burning midnight oil to find a cure, who weep with concern, are mostly false, rare like the ones who find cures and refuse to patent or personally profit. Those days have become a myth. What's replaced them are businessmen wanting status amongst peers, entry to country clubs and power, gaslighters, hustlers, actors like Trump. There's a doctor at Mount Sinai, star of his field, charged with drugging and raping his patients. No one believed it until it was proven. His victims were only Black women. The rest, he left alone. I can't breathe. I suppose I should place them under separate files. Both died from different circumstances, kind of. One from HIV/AIDS and possibly not having taken his medicines. The other from COVID-19, coupled with complications from an underlying HIV status. In each case, their deaths may have been preventable if one had taken his meds and the hospital had thought to treat the other instead of sending him home saying he wasn't sick enough. He died a few days later. They were both mountains of men, dark, Black, beautiful, gay men, both more than 6 feet tall, fierce, and way ahead of their time. One's drag persona was Wonder Woman, and the other started a Black fashion magazine. He also liked poetry. They both knew each other from the same club scene we all grew up in. When I was working the door at a club one frequented, he would always say to me, "Haven't they figured out you're a star yet?" And years ago, bartending with the other, when I complained about certain people and treatment, he said, "It sounds as if it's time for you to clean house." Both I know were proud of me. The poet star stayed true to my roots. I guess what stands out to me is that they were both gay, Black, mountains of men, cut down, fell too early. And it makes me think that the biggest and blackest are almost always more vulnerable. My white friend speculates why the doctor sent one home. If he had enough antibodies, did they not know his HIV status? She approaches it rationally, removed from race, as if there were any rationale for sending him home. Still, she credits the doctors for thinking it through. But I speculate they saw a big black man before them. Maybe they couldn't imagine him weak. Maybe because of his size, color, class, they imagined him strong, said he's okay, which happened to me so many times. Once when I'd been hospitalized at the same time as a white girl, she had pigtails. We had the same thing, but I saw how tenderly they treated her. And knowing so many times in the medical system, I would have never been treated so terribly if I had had a man with me, or if I were white and entitled enough to sue. Both deaths could have been prevented. Both were almost first to fall in this season of death. But it reminds me of what I said after Eric Garner, a large black man, was strangled to death over some cigarettes. 6 cops took him down. His famous last words were, "I can't breathe." And now George Floyd. So if we are always the threat, to whom and where do we turn for protection? And I don't know, do you want to talk for a minute? Maybe I'll read a couple other things.
Sure, yeah. So like building on these sort of pandemic poems that you have written, I received the manuscript for this PDF on March 10th. Where I live in Los Angeles, within 5 days, almost all businesses will be shut down. Within 10, shelter in place will be the law of the land. And I'm interested because the book that I got is different than the PDF. I think Circus Acts is in there, and then everything after When the Rainbow is Enough. And I'm curious why the circumstances of the world that we're living in and continue to inhabit. Because here's the thing about your poems. Everything is happening right now. Every dinner you've ever had, every bar that you've ever went to, every blade of grass, every museum, every light bulb, every table, like every wingback, every snake plant, everything in the entire, every work of art, every book, every song, they all exist right now in your work. And I just watch you like pick them out and then pull them and then kind of weave them all together. And we get this tapestry, which is the line, the word, the line, the poem, the book, all of that. You have this way of making everything exist right now because, what is time? So what was it about what was going on that made you be like, no, these need to be in this book?
Well, actually, I had a conversation with Stacey Lewis, and I mean, at City Lights, and she does publicity and stuff, and she was asking me if I were prepared to talk about the 2 pandemics, because I mean, really, the book was fashioned around the AIDS epidemic, and basically, a lot of people of color, Black men and women who were fell to AIDS and to cancer. And so somebody just called it like a love letter to those people, to the people who've been forgotten and left behind. And I know that there hasn't been really any kind of comprehensive, documentation, particularly by a woman of color and a lesbian about, living through that time in the late 80s, early 90s, where I saw like most of my peers kind of like destroyed, So, so that was the first part of the book. And then when Stacey asked me about if I was prepared to talk about the 2 pandemics, I was like, I was writing all this stuff. I had done, I did 30-30, which in April, which was with the, what is it? The poetry organization. They do, 30-30 challenge. Yeah, and I had never done it before. And that's like write a poem for like every day for 30 days. And I did it. I partnered with a friend, and it was so I was just documenting all this stuff that was happening during the pandemic, and then it was interesting. They're saying my internet connection is unstable. Wait, I gotta just make sure. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So, so the bottom line is that what happened? So I said, but actually I have these poems. Yeah, I'm prepared to talk about it. And then we talked about the book spanning the two pandemics. So like ending, you know, ending on this new one. Yeah.
And the way that it was, the way that it was kind of pitched is that it's a poetic memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, and I've been guilty of this, poets in particular are kind of like, well, I can't write this other way. I can't write an essay. I can't write a blank. I can't write a blank. And what was so beautiful about this was it did write a memoir, but in your way. And it invented, and it's like defying, I think Hilton always talked about it, defying genre or something like that, I'm curious because some of these poems have been, as you say in the book, you've been working on for 15 years, and then some of them are extremely new. So I'm curious, are there ways that this book fought you in writing it and putting it together?
No, not at all. No, I think that this book has been waiting to come out for a really long time. I always wanted to do something that would, you know, memorialize my, you know, my brothers and my sisters. And so, and yeah, they were things that I had worked on. And actually, I first, you know, showed some of these stories, particularly the essays, you know, they were pretty raw, but I had them at the beginning of a manuscript that I was trying to sell called America Ain't Ready. And it was actually based on Allen Ginsberg's Howl. And it was sort of like, it was like this epic about the role of artists in society, right? And so it's funny and it's serious and it goes in on pop culture and all this stuff, but it's like a running monologue. Yeah, it's like 150 pages. And then I had a couple of these stories started, and I remember showing them to Amy like 10 years ago, and she goes, "Oh, what about those stories? Would you ever work on those stories?" And I was like, "What?" And I mean, literally, I had just like thrown them in there. It wasn't anything that I was ever thinking about. And so interestingly enough, it was Amy like 10 years ago who told me to like look at those stories and develop them, you know? So the interesting thing is, but I mean, you know, the bottom line is that I write in hybrid form. You know, I write like, I mean, even Hilton was like, he was looking at some other work of mine and he's like, you know, these are not poems, you know, these are like, you know, small essays or reports or something like that. And so I've always had a sense of like the epic. I've always had a sense of like just moving between genres. You know, people are saying at this particular point that like I've created my own kind of like canon. You know, I have my own references, I have my own style, and I'm like by any means necessary. But I do feel like that's the that is the wave of the future. You know, like there was this period I think in literature where everything was like so purist, you know, and it's like, ew, you know, you are a poet, you are a spoken word poet, you know, write literature, you write essays, you know, and like finally, I mean, even Shakespeare was interdisciplinary. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like theater, poetry, you know, everything, right? Toni Morrison had a theater. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, please, like, you know, like, so all these separations, like, finally, I feel like the world of literature is beginning to break that down a little bit more. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, you know, finally, we don't have to just ascribe to, you know, one thing, you know, or be purist, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, I just wrote an essay, but that was a poem to me, you know, like it didn't have line breaks, but it still sounded like me. It's still something that I would have written, although like I packaged it as an essay and then I got like some money for it. And it's interesting that you begin with these more sort of prosaic blocks that have the paragraph breaks and that are almost hesitant to break the line. And then it like gets like more and more gleefully broken. And it's like, to me physically, it was almost like a comet in a trail, you know?
Wow.
And so I'm curious, like, if writing this, were there any notable differences in the writing and the construction and the generation of this than some of your other works?
Well, I mean, I feel like prose or like hybrid literature requires a little bit more time. I mean, it's like, poetry I can do, walking around. And I may have an idea for a story, but it has to be developed more through the page. So I would say the time and how they evolved over time, and then creating like sort of like the epilogues, and it was like really a period of like unearthing, like literally. And I think that that's something that happens with prose, like with each draft, you get like closer to something else, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or you build the story or something else is revealed, so in that regard, I mean, I think it's a different process, I think, for the prosaic ones. But I mean, it is interesting that like you've noticed that like everything kind of like descends into poetry for me. So even all my prose pieces, like they always become poetry at some point, right? Like that's the end. But I also have like this philosophy that like when an artist is like at the peak of who they are, like everything becomes poetry.
Mm.
So I've like watched like, my actor friends, like, like at the peak of their career become poets. I'm watching their shows and I'm like, that's poetry. Or,
Mm.
I'm watching like, a friend of mine do a film or something like that. And I'm like, that's poetry. You know what I mean? So I feel like when you really become yourself or when you really hit your stride, it's all poetry. I mean, like, one of my favorite books of Toni Morrison's besides Beloved was Mercy. And I mean, that's a poem, that's a poem essay, you know what I mean? That is like, that's not, prose, right? That is a poem, and so a lot of it, the lines are obscured, but I feel like when an artist really becomes themselves, it always is poetry.
I love that. In this new book, last night, you had, because Pamela performed for a queer art mentorship party, which is how we know each other, because in 2011, Pamela selected me to be her mentee in the inaugural year of this program that has since gone on to, like, they got HBO money now. Back in the day, we didn't have that shit.
Right.
And you said before you started to read that that this book has been well received in a way that you did not anticipate. And I'm curious if there are ways in which it's being read now that, like, in what ways that you didn't anticipate it, or that, like, that or ways that it's being read that surprise you.
Well, the Publishers Weekly, review, which was really positive. And I remember like years ago, like when I first did Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery, like Kirkus, like, I mean, they said some things. I was like, oh my God. Like they had no sense of like me as an author. It was like, there's this big black, thing saying all these things. I mean, it was really dehumanizing. It was horrible.
Mm.
And so I feel like, that's how the mainstream like perceives me or something. I mean, I've worked like in voiceover and stuff like that and in theater, and I feel like they were much more, that mainstream was much more open to me. But in like literature, it was just sort of like, who the hell is she and what is she saying? I mean, it was racist. It was really mean.
Mm.
It was almost like I wasn't like a person. Like it was like I'd constructed a book to like bother them. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, like I wasn't really thinking about you. So, I mean, that kind of stayed in my mind as to how, the mainstream kind of like perceived me, right? And so now to like be embraced, like I have like something coming out with Lit Hub, an interview and Publishers Weekly, and I don't know, and like, people are reading it and they're really excited and they're saying in Booklist, said some real, and it was really funny because when I heard Booklist was reviewing it and stuff, and they were talking about it, And I think I was like close to last, and I was like waiting because I didn't know what they were gonna say, and I was like hyperventilating a little bit. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? And like the woman read it, and it was so beautiful, and I was like, oh my god, she got it! Like she got it, you know. And so maybe we've moved into, you know, a time where people can get it, you know what I mean? Or they're not so afraid, or they're not so, yeah. So again, we've moved, you know, we're interdisciplinary. Writers can do different things. And again, we're starting to recognize gay and lesbian people and how they've been kept out of the literary canon for the most part, you know. So, I mean, yeah, so there is a level of like recognition, and then also, you know, the idea that like, and the woman said that I created my own clarion, that like, even though I was like, you know, I'm talking about, you know, Butler and Lorde and Morrison, that I, you know, I'm like tooting my own, you know, horn, that I'm establishing my own, you know, fight for justice. And I thought that that's a beautiful recognition. So maybe, you know, we've moved into a time where people are like less afraid. And I mean, I've also, you know, I mean, I've grown up more, you know what I mean? It's just sort of like now I'm really grown up, you know. But I think Marie Brown just passed, and she said, you know, it's going to take a long time for people to get ready for you. And she told me that a long, long time ago.
There was also like when I was reading this, you know, and of course, like I can, because I've seen you perform so often, and you are like a prototype, or like a, you're just like, in my mind, you were one of the first people who I saw perform that I was like, I want to do what Pamela does. Like I want to do, because like I've watched crowds literally stand on their feet in the middle of a poem because they just couldn't take it. They just couldn't take the words without, you know, exaltation, you know. And of course, you know, I've seen people cry and seen people laugh at, and because I've been in your audience so often. I'm curious about like what's happening now, and because and when we were on the pre-call, you said this is like your 15th day of performing, but you know, we're used to performing in front of people like who we can see, whose faces we can look into, whose eyes we can connect with, whose feelings, you know, there's a reciprocity there when you're a performer and in performing to an audience that is responding to your work. And I'm curious like how that if that feedback loop is different for you now in this period of prolonged stasis.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely harder, but the interesting thing is that, I mean, I'm really fortunate because I haven't gone broke in the pandemic. I feel like, you know, everybody, you know, wants me to read, you know what I mean? Everybody wants to talk. So I've been working, you know? So I'm like, in a way, you know, the circumstances have lent themselves to me getting a lot of work, you know what I mean? Because it's like what Zoom does, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you talk, you know, to a lot of people, you know what I mean? You give like lectures and stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, I miss like live performance and stuff like that. Like right before the pandemic, I was working on a show, a tribute to Big Mama Thornton. And I was basically training, you know, as a singer. And basically I was working with this woman that trains like Barbara. She trains like Taylor Mack, like Penny Arcade, everybody downtown. And
She's like the older white lady who like lives
yeah,
in.
yeah.
I've studied with her before. Yeah.
Like walk on water, you know. And then I did a performance with Katrina Del Mar's band. And basically, and I performed Hound Dog as Big Mama Thornton, and I brought the house down. It was amazing, right? And it was my first time ever performing with a band and everything. And but it was like this crazy feeling. And yeah, I don't know, everybody just showed up, and it was just like, and it felt like the New York that we knew and that we loved, and it was just amazing. So I kind of like, I miss that, you know, I miss that connection, you know, definitely. Like the other day, I did perform live at the Poetry Project And basically I was walking home with people and I was like, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy to be around people, so
I mean,
yeah.
I miss New York. I miss New York for that so much. I mean, I've been in LA for 2 years, and I feel like the when I read Sidewalk Rage, and I was like, it wasn't, we don't have the same exact type of rage, but walking around and being enraged with people, that's how I know I'm still a New Yorker. Like, even though I'm here in LA, like I know I'm still a New Yorker because of that Sidewalk Rage. Would you read that for us?
Sure. I'm just like nervous about my internet connection here. Now that's like, instead of the live audience thing, instead I get like freaked out about whether or not my internet's gonna hold up. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's the new nervousness. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I've had it go out on me. I've had like my battery accidentally die and like have to reconnect, and it's just like, ooh.
Yeah, it's really scary. Okay, so I'm not sure why, but it's taken forever for me to write this poem. I hope to remember all the pieces, but I've developed a new condition, one that's come from age. I can no longer take the shit that I once did. And there's a part of my condition that comes from gentrification and cell phone use, living amidst tech zombies and their general fear and hatred of people of color. My condition is called sidewalk rage. It's kind of like road rage, but it comes when I'm walking down the street and there's some millennial who's just moved into the neighborhood who thinks it's theirs, some grown white girl who in broad daylight feels a dark presence walking behind her. It's me, minding my own business, and she gets so panicked and paralyzed, she stops walking and holds her purse. And with my new condition, I yell, if you don't want to live around Black people, get the fuck out of the neighborhood. She is shocked. Or in another scenario, you see random white women on their phones standing in a doorway, completely blocking it because, only they exist. And you're like, hello, hello. Yes, all these years I thought I was still a small town girl. And then suddenly with my sidewalk rage, I'm a bona fide New Yorker, like the ones you've seen on bicycles banging on the hood of a taxi cab that tries to cut them off. My person with sidewalk rage is a character of their own. Where once I was silent, recently, I confronted a man who was blocking my path, crossing the street. He had his head down and he almost rammed into me. I sucked my teeth loud and I shouted, hello, hello, move. He was so angry I confronted him. He yelled, suck my dick. I started to yell something profane, but I stopped myself. And then I was in the subway going downstairs and a white man rammed into me on the phone. My sidewalk rage kicked in and I thought for a second to sneak behind him and kick him down the stairs. That's my sidewalk rage, but I stopped myself. I don't know who this person is in me, who would never speak up for herself, was always soft and vulnerable, who's been at various times pickpocketed, blasphemed, body slammed, ransacked, ridiculed, who now has a voice, who now lets rage show, who couldn't express herself, has now become all angles and sharp edges.
So once again, I want to remind everybody, if you've got a question for Pamela or I, but mostly Pamela, you can put it in the Q&A. Has the sidewalk rage changed in COVID?
No, maybe now it's like kind of like mask rage, like, in the beginning, it was still really tentative going into like the grocery stores and stuff. And there's like a new market by my house. And like this one, this white woman, like basically like she had this like long hair and she kept touching her hair. And like a kid had an Easter basket and had planted it like on the vegetables. And the kid was like, like, I don't know, playing with the vegetables. And then the woman was like touching her hair and then touching the stuff. And I just thought, I'm going to lose my fucking mind. You know what I mean? It was like, look, and then she was like, I forgot something. And she ran outside and she took her hands and then she didn't sanitize them. And she like went through all the vegetables and ran back inside. And she was like in her own little bubble, and I was just like furious. And I mean, and her kids running all around the store. And that's privilege, right?
Yeah.
It was just kind of like, so that's my sidewalk rage. You know what I mean? And I mean, I literally had to get out of there because I was like really hyperventilating. I was just like, like.
I know what you mean, and again, not in the same exact way, but I feel like that there is like a social contract that we have and that we've agreed to, and that some people just are not following the rules.
Right.
And mostly just because of my particular situation, the one that bothers me the most is couples who refuse. I'm just a person by myself. I'm walking down the sidewalk. We have to share this thing. And who just refuse to either, because when I'm walking with somebody and there's this, like somebody walking down the way, I'll file behind the person I'm with until that other person passes. And then I stand next to them again. And when it's couples, they just grind my gears. And I'm like, I have to be like, one of you is going to have to go behind the other because I'm walking this way.
Yeah, like feeling really militant. Yeah, and it's funny because I was afraid, to like read that poem, but that's like my, not afraid tonight, but I think when I first like penned it, because that's like really coming out about like my kind of humor, you know what I mean, too. And then finally like fighting back because we're like supposed to just like swallow all this stuff, like even last night, I read a new poem about what is it, Black Lives Matter, and feeling like Black Lives Matter should be a pedagogy, should be practice, that it's not just a statement. And talking about how people treat Black people close to them like they don't give them any rights or whatever. But it's like, if you want to like, save somebody that you don't know, it's like, oh, their Black life matters, and it's not just like white people who do it, it's everybody, you know what I mean? Like, we don't have any value for ourselves and for our day-to-day treatment of each other, and there needs to be a bigger awareness. But I was like scared to read that. Like sometimes I'm like, because I'm like, taking people to task, a bit. And yeah, it's scary because you never know what the pushback is going to be. But mostly, people like really love it.
Yeah. Well, my friend Morgan, who I mentioned in my essay, whose yard I go to, was also lived in New York, but moved to LA like a year before I did, would talk about white girls walking into her. But then also like in the pandemic, she's just like, white girls still cross the street, like with masks and all that kind of shit. Like, I could take my dog out. White girls still cross to the other side of the sidewalk when I'm walking by. Like, very little has changed. And that, like, there's a particular, and like about if you don't want to live around Black people, don't live in a Black neighborhood. Like, that there is a particular type of like white blindness or something that like they continue to occupy space in ways that like they don't even, that's just so breezy for them that they don't even think about that. Of course they wouldn't look up from their phones. Of course there's nobody standing in front of them. Of course they don't care if somebody else needs to walk through this door frame or into this store or into this bathroom, like there's an obliviousness there that is just like unsettling.
Yeah, well, I was sitting in the park today, and like this white woman like was with a child, and she kept like, fumbling with the gate. And then she was like really frustrated. And she was like, how do I do this? And like she said to me, and I was like, I said, well, lift it up. And I said, but I don't know. I don't work here. Right? And it's just like, and she didn't even like respond. But it's like, I'm not the help lady. You know what I mean? Like, figure it out,
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just like so demanding. How do I lift this? And I said, I don't work here, I don't know.
It's an entitlement, and it's like, I don't know. I don't expect anyone to figure out anything for me. That's why Google's there, or that's why books are there. Like, if I don't know how to do something, I figure it out. I don't expect somebody to just tell me what to do.
Right, the Black person that's sitting near, because of course we're supposed to be of help. You know what I mean? Like, but I was just, but even when I said, I don't know, I don't work here, she still didn't say like, I'm sorry, or, you know what I mean? She just like ran off with her kid and then came back, so there was just not even any recognition too of like what I said, but then the other thing is that like, now they've all moved into the hood and they're like treating it like it's a gated community, and it's like, hello, it's the hood. You know what I mean?
We've got a question from David Hellman that says, Pamela, I would love to hear more about your other creative forms, such as performance and especially visual arts. Ooh, talk about the cover. I'm also interested in your thoughts about how these forms intersect with your poetry. Thank you.
Ah, well, that's a big question. David and I went to the New School together, right? And he's in San Francisco, and so we go back a long way. I trained with Laura Alpert, who's JT Leroy. We're in the same, same literature classes. So all of us Lang people go back, and I thank you, David, for supporting me, all these years. And so basically, well, in the beginning with visual art, well, I don't know, I'm very instinctual, right? And so like 10 years ago, I did an MFA, and and I was always making installations and stuff like that. I was also always a visual person. But when I finished the MFA, I was like, oh, gee, I want to start making something with my hands. And then somebody was standing by me and they started clapping. And it was like, oh, finally she got it, right? And I was like, oh, yeah. And then it took another 5 years, and I had some kind of fancy health insurance, and they paid for any kind of therapy. And I was like, ooh, I'm gonna try art therapy. And so I did, and that was sort of like, the segue into visual art. Like I realized that like I had a voice in that, and that was important to me. And then, but the interesting thing is that like in the beginning, and everyone was like, oh, you're not new. And I mean, I know like, all the most like famous gallerists, the most famous visual artists in this country. And everybody was like, oh, Pamela, you're not new at it, just like you're writing, right? And I was like, oh, no, like I didn't want to be forced into putting poetry, like they're like, like Glenn Lagan or, and respectfully, like I like all of that, but it was like I actually wanted freedom from the word. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to like just like make my visual art an extension of my, poetry, right? So for a while it was really separate. And then I think now, kind of like in my 4th and 5th year, now I'm like, oh, I want to write on everything. So it's just kind of like I had to kind of come to it on my own terms. Do you know what I mean? And like now I don't feel like a big separation. Like I feel like, and I also feel like I process a lot of my writing through my visual art. So I feel like a lot of my poems come out much more whole because they've already gone through a lot of processes, with regard to my visual stuff, so I'm always working through things. So they're not, they're not separate. But now, yeah, I'm like developing. It was kind of like I didn't want to be pressured to do it. I just wanted to do it on my own. And so now I've come to it, and it's like I can't separate the two, and I don't want to, but I had to go through that myself.
That's a little bit why I cling to flowers, right? The
Yeah.
final poem in the collection, which ends with, I mean, this is a book of resilience, right? I mean, it's called Funeral Diva, and like the titular poem is heartbreaking. Like, but like you end this collection with "We Can Heal," and I did get like in the curation of this work and in your words and knowing how you read it is, I believe you, I have to. I too have to cling to flowers. Will you talk to us about the cover, which is a painting of yours, right?
Yeah, well, one of the things, and I mean, one of the brilliant things, I want to give a shout out to all the artists in the pandemic, because, like basically people have been offering all kinds of classes, discounted classes, donating their work, and so, I mean, we've been essential workers, giving people the word, giving people the art, everything to get through this very difficult experience. And so, and we've given so generously. But so I just wanted to say that, like, I'm really grateful to all the artists, in this pandemic. And so anyway, like I've just been taking like a lot of classes. Like I love taking classes, and I guess that's the way that, I'm in community with other art makers, and I'm like learning. So I don't know that much about the language of visual art. I mean, I've taught visual culture, so I mean, I'm not that far away from, you know what I mean? But as a maker, it's a different language. And so I've had to learn it, you know, so I've been studying painting, I've been studying, you know, collage, all kinds of, now I'm taking an assemblage class. But basically I was taking a class and we were doing these 5-minute paintings and wait, okay. And so we had to like take a portrait, you know, from our phone and we had to paint it with primary colors. And so this was the one, you know, so this was one of the ones that I did and I always loved it. Yeah. And I was studying with Zach Seeger and like, he's sweet. He's a really sweet guy. And I gave him like a thank you in the book. Yeah, cause he, you know, he like sort of guided me through, you know?
Yeah, I love it. And I love that, you know, that you know, it's not visual work is so much, I mean, like I said before, as with literature, as with museums, as with memories, as with people, like it's all happening at the same time in your work. And like visual art is also a part of that thread. If there aren't any more questions, I was wondering if maybe you would close us out with Why I Cling to Flowers?
Okay, sure. I think I see another question though, is there?
There's a comment and then a link to buy the books, but there was only one question.
Buy my books. Buy Tommy's book. Um, I was trying to think of what it means. Why I keep painting and posting flowers and trees in the pandemic. I know they're beautiful and they assert amidst any chaos and confusion, life on the planet. Every spring, despite climate change, every natural disaster, purple crocus push up out of the ground determined. I'm fascinated by their colors, bright purple, violet, and white, red, blue, and yellow. I love that some humans place wire nets over them to protect their growth so they won't get trampled on. I sometimes think of Brooklyn streets as fashion runways. All the flowers modeled for humans trying to look their best in various poses, showing off their blooms, each trying to outdo the other with fabulousness, like Black women on Easter wearing an array of hats. I love pink, purple, magenta, magnolia blossoms, how each bulb occupies a separate branch, looking and pointing to the sky like an elegant candelabra. I love the daffodils and orange yellow faces, and one daffodil that I pass each day pushes its neck through an opening in a metal garden gate. I identify with how it breaks apart, stands separate, as if refusing the confines of a cell. I struggle to understand what this all means, why I cling to flowers. When the news feed reports COVID-19 death after death and fear, they say the pandemic most affects Black people, migrant workers, and poor brown people globally, the aged and those with underlying conditions. And your friends are still dying from AIDS, even when you thought and hoped and prayed the worst was over. They say the next 2 weeks will be the pandemic's greatest peak in America. People are yelling and fighting in grocery stores, on the street. There is so much fear. And the life you knew, good or bad, may never return. But finally, talking to my father today, I understood my connection to flowers more. Over the years, anticipating his demise, he's given me messages, said you never gave me any problems. You went off and you did things on your own. You did everything all by yourself. You decided to go to New York and you never looked back. You've made it on your own. Today we talked about the pandemic. I try to find masks and hand sanitizer to send to my family. Touched and impressed by my efforts, my father said, you still look out for us. You're a beautiful girl. I'm glad you're my daughter. I'm here for you. And then I understand what it all means. If we can survive, have equipment, means, money, support, conditions, there are also other possibilities. We can heal.
It was actually very when I realized that the book, when it came to me, when I realized that it was different, and I got so excited because I got to read it over again, but I knew the ending was going to be different. And I was curled up in my wing back, and I read that last line, and I just like lost it. Well,
that note.
yeah, thank you so much for your work, and also thank you so much for you and what you've meant to me personally in my life. You've altered the course of my life for the better, and I was awakened to ambitions that I didn't know that I had. And there's so much of that in this book too, and you talk about the people who guided you and who put their hands on your shoulders and who read your work and uplifted you and encouraged you to go further and told you there's something here. And you did that for me. And whether it was just spreading my palms out in your office or, something about projecting your voice, or in 2014 when you told me that the Tumblr post that I was working on was actually a book, and I never imagined writing a book before that. Literally, I mean, I wrote zines and I had stuff, but I never imagined anything that I would write actually would become a book. And thank you for your guidance and for your encouragement and for your example and for your writing.
I love you. I'm really, really proud of you.
Thank
I'm
you.
really, really proud of you. I knew it though. I knew. I do have that vision. So, so thank you. Thank you.
And that was the first time I was ever chosen for anything. That's the first time I ever won anything. That's the first time anybody ever looked at me and said, there's something here. And I had spent like so long trying to find that person again. Cause like, I knew I was him when I was little. I was him when I was a child, and then somewhere along the way, I lost him. And I didn't know if I was going to get him back, and I did.
Yeah, he's amazing and beautiful and strong and such a beautiful poet, and that's a poem. Ah!
All right, well, if you don't know, now you know. Buy Funeral Diva. The link is in the Q&A. Is there anything else, City Lights, we need to say?
I just want to say thank you, everybody, for supporting me. Thank you, City Lights. Thank you, Litquake. Thank you to Tommy Pico. Thanks, everybody who came in the audience. So,
thank you, Pamela.
I want to take Elaine, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share as we start to close out.
No, except that I'm crying along with you, and that was a beautiful way to end this conversation. It's so good to think about hope and healing and vision and possibility and the magic dust that happens when you're recognized and you blossom. And all of that is what this, that's just such a gorgeous ending to this. So thank you for bringing us. I'm sure we're not the only ones crying right now. Thank you so much.
So I want to, it looks like we have one more comment in the chat. It says, it's from Carla, and it says, thanks for Sidewalk Rage. As a New Yorker living in Oakland, California, I felt the feeling of rage. Also the writing about AIDS and that time period. When we think about the epidemic of AIDS and also cancer for women, there's so much loss of creativity we never got to experience. Marlon Riggs, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Pat Parker, Essex Hemphill, Joseph Beam, and so many others whose words had never the chance to develop. Thank you for bringing this out for all to see. Beautiful ending too.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I really want to thank you both on behalf of the Litquake team. This is the second session that I've hosted, and I just so appreciate the chance to understand what inspires artists and like yourselves, and to have that chance to have you share that work with us. And I really also appreciated getting a chance to see how artists inspire each other. Maybe that's not something that I think about all the time, but to see the connection that the two of you had and how impactful it has been, I think, to both of you was really remarkable. And I think it highlights kind of like what our goal is at Litquake, which is to, to have these conversations and to center great literature and great artists. And, we're so happy to have City Lights as a partner, because I believe that City Lights also champions great artists. And we want to really encourage everybody who's been listening to support the artists, support City Lights. The link is in the chat for Pamela's newest book, and I believe there's a 30% discount if you use that link. So we're really excited about that. So as we close out, I want to again thank everybody. I want to mention that as soon as we pop off, a survey will pop up. And maybe surveys are nobody's favorite thing, but you know what? They really help with funding and making sure that our funders see the impact of evenings like this. So we hope that you take a moment to fill out that survey. I want to mention that tomorrow, starting at 10:30, tomorrow is 12 hours of amazing literary events starting at 10:30. We have Global Lit Crawl, and it goes from 10:30 to 3:30. We then take an hour break and then start up again at 4:30 till 10:30. So this has like been my dream to have a lit crawl this long. So we're super excited about that. There is one more session tonight. Tonight is our second to last night at 7 o'clock called Fantasy and Dystopia with Corey Doctorow and Richard Padre. So we hope that you might join us for that. And lastly, we just want to thank everybody as the festival comes to a close. Without your support, we wouldn't be who we are. As I mentioned before, this is a tough time for community nonprofits and community institutions. So we hope that you take a minute to support them. We hope you take a minute to support us as well. If you make it rain a little bit, we'll be back next year. So we know that you have us in your hearts, and we hope that you can extend that support. So on that note, I want to close out. Thank you, everybody, and to everybody watching. Please join us for our next session at 7, and then tomorrow for our 12-hour lit crawl. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye. Love you.
So much.
Thank you.